In her 2009 book Frames of War, Judith Butler claims that people cannot easily recognize the value of a human life outside the frames in which that life is presented. In other words, Butler thinks that all human beings are already presented, framed, packaged as members of a particular social group that is for some reason worthy or not worthy of being appreciated, protected, and grieved over. The recent events at the United States Capitol are a good representation of Butler's point. We saw images of Trump supporters who basically without any resistance from the Capitol Police swarmed a key governmental building and started looting. Look at the security guy, for example. He has time to take a selfie with a domestic terrorist. Great fun! An obvious question arises. Why is it so easy for these people to do this? Why aren't they afraid of consequences of being identified? In Butler's terms, we can say that these people are quite unique in that their lives seem to be worthy of being protected even when they engage in, well, terrorism. Not only that, the naive determination with which these people swarmed the Capitol and paraded their identities to the world show that they themselves are quite aware of their privileged position on the social ladder. They know that they are differently exposed to violence than, say, black or brown people. Now let's consider another image. Here you see a group of National Guard troops at the Lincoln Memorial during a Black Lives Matter protest. These soldiers are organized in anticipation of violence from activists that are protesting the killing of George Floyd. There's a clear discrepancy here. Whereas Black Lives Matter activists protesting against police brutality are themselves perceived as a threat, the actual domestic terrorists can simply pop by the Capitol, do some parkour in the hallway, rest their feet on Pelosi's table, threaten elected lawmakers and the whole of the presidential line of succession. These two examples show that the precariousness of different social groups is always presented to us with different intensity. Some lives are presented as worthy of protection, some are not presented as such. Butler claims that in fact all human beings are precarious insofar as we live in a society where a person's life is always in the hands of another person. We are indeed obligated not to cause harm to a stranger on the street. However, not all lives are presented as equally valuable, worthy of being protected or grieved over. Butler writes, "Forms of racism instituted and active at the level of perception tend to produce iconic versions of populations who are eminently grievable and others whose loss is no loss, and who remain ungrievable." Butler emphasizes that the distribution of precarity and grievability is at once a material and a perceptual issue. It is a perceptual issue insofar as certain lives may be regarded as non-valuable or grievable, and at the same time, it is a material issue insofar as certain lives may bear the burden of underemployment, legal disenfranchisement, and differential exposure to violence and death. Now, it is important to note that the Capitol rioters and the Black Lives Matter protesters encapsulate two very different types of relationships between a living being and the police force. The fundamental difference between these two relationships is that the Black Lives Matter protests sought to minimize the precariousness of black and brown people at the hands of the police, while the Capitol rioters sought to maximize the precariousness of anyone who is against their daddy. In other words, one movement tried to democratize the state and police authority, while the other sought to make this authority absolutely unaccountable. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that Trump supporters found it easy to wreak havoc at the Capitol. Their interests were ultimately aligned with those of an authoritarian police state. As Black Lives Matter protests showed time and time again, it is indeed much more dangerous to fight for minimization of precarity, because then you're fighting against the very forces that bet on your precarity.